Hello, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery. I'm Aya Soma, and I'm here with Bhante Sudaso and Venerable Vimalanyani, visiting from Sri Lanka and spending the Vasa here. So thank you all for joining us this evening. So as usual, you're welcome to type in your question, and we'll try our best to answer it. So hello to Rick, Sam, Kauser friend and Roy, who have so far checked in to say hello. There's also Geeta. Oh, Geeta, hello, great. And also Facebook user that you're anonymous on our
And Vidura.
Vidura, welcome. Good to see you. All right, so we can start. I see already some questions. Hello to Jorge. Rick asks, Venerables, can you share some reflections on what to do when meditation, Dhamma study, or interacting with other practitioners triggers trauma? So maybe I'll pass this up to Venerable Vimalanyani.
Yeah, I mean, take good care of yourself, practice some self-metta. Practicing metta is always good to counter trauma. So practicing metta for yourself, practicing metta for others, wishing for everybody to be happy is a very good way to counter trauma, to deal with traumatic experiences, to overcome them. Of course, it depends on your particular situation. So if there is a situation that was traumatic for you in the past or that really, really triggers your trauma, don't put yourself into that situation. So if you have difficulty with a particular person or a particular monastery, maybe go to another monastery, maybe associate with another teacher. Maybe that teacher just wasn't the right teacher for you, or that particular community isn't the right community for you. So just, there isn't one size fits all in the Dhamma. So find your own path and find what's good for you. And if something's really, really triggering, then, find a way to skillfully deal with that. And that can mean avoiding that particular thing that's so triggering for you. And over time, if your practice, makes progress, or if you yourself are able to overcome that trauma, then in the future, it might be easier for you again to associate with that particular place or that particular person or that particular practice. But if you're not in the right space at the moment to practice in that way, then just, find another practice. There are so many different meditation methods, so many different techniques, so many different teachers out there also. So you don't have to do the thing that is so difficult for you. That's why the Buddha taught many different methods, because it's not one method that fits for everybody. And yeah, I think just, observe your own mind, see what's happening. And if that really brings up a lot of defilement, a lot of trauma, a lot of difficult emotions, then practice in another way. And I think there's so many different ways. I'm sure you can find one that is good for you. And metta practice might be a good thing to do.
Thank you, Venerable. Bhante Sudaso, do you have anything?
Yeah, I agree with everything that she said. The one thing I would add is don't be too quick to run away. Sometimes we want to avoid practitioners just because we don't like them or because they annoy us, but that's not a good reason. So the Buddha said there are defilements to be overcome through enduring. So sometimes the proper thing to do actually is just to practice patience with the situation, to practice equanimity. But then there are also defilements to be overcome through avoidance. So sometimes the situation really is just too much for us, and when we're in that situation, our defilements just get worse. And in that situation, then, as Aya Vimalanyani was saying, the best thing to do is to leave and go somewhere else. So you do need to be realistic. If something is within your power to endure while growing in the Dhamma, then that's the right thing to do. But if it's beyond your power and it's just making your defilements worse, then yes, you should go somewhere else. But yeah, just be clear, because I've seen people make the mistake both ways. So the mistake of running away from a situation, which was actually good training for them, but they ran away because they felt it was triggering too much trauma. And I've also seen it the other way, where people stayed in a situation that actually was really unhealthy for them. And they just stuck it out with this kind of macho attitude, which wound up not being good for them. So you need some wisdom to know what the right situation is.
Okay, thank you to both of the venerables. I will just add, since you also mentioned meditation and Dhamma study, that is very interesting because there is, as both the venerables mentioned, that kind of balance that one needs to understand what exactly is going on in their experience to see, is this something that can be endured, that can be dealt with, or is it beyond my practice? But then there's also, the one needs to, I think, also do another reflection, and that sometimes when we enter a spiritual path, we might think that it's going to be all, all peace and love and, pink ponies and unicorns and fuzzy, warm feelings. And we think of perhaps meditation as being the Google image of either a peaceful monk on the tip of a mountain or a blonde girl on the beach. This is usually these days, the past decade, that's more the Google images result. But then we sit down and all of a sudden, actually, our mind is full of greed, hatred, and delusion, and a lot of flashbacks from the past might come and appear, and there's a lot of suffering. So it's not as peaceful and as pleasant as we thought. And so there is, kind of an understanding that the Buddha talks about the first noble truth. He doesn't just talk about, okay, yes, come and do Buddhism, practice Buddhism, all fuzzy hearts, but we're talking about the first noble truth. There is suffering. So we need to also be okay at looking at our suffering, understand what is suffering, how are we experiencing suffering in this life, and then really studying the teachings. And some things are going to be triggering. At the very beginning of my practice, I was both enamored by the Dhamma and also triggered by the Dhamma. As Bhante Sudaso remembers, that's how we became friends. I was the Italian, lay person who was coming to the Dhamma talks, and I was like, oh yes, this is great, until there was something said that was extremely triggering to me. And so I would react in quite aggressively, actually. I mean, I wouldn't start punching anyone there, but I would raise my hand, and I was very vocal about it, and but still with an open mind to try to figure out, to try to understand what was it that I was finding triggering inside of myself, and also what was the Dhamma talking about that. So there's not, one straight answer to your question, but rather it's an invitation to really look at what is going on in your experience and really seeing what it is that is the root, what is triggering you. Is it something intellectual, or is it something that happened? Is it something that perhaps you also need, some help from someone else? It's okay to rely on therapists. It's okay to rely on, psychologists, whatever it is, people that are qualified that can support us also in figuring out what it is that our suffering, how our suffering manifests, and then how it's how the Dharma can help us in this moment, in this particular time and place. So don't be afraid to ask for help as well. So I think we covered that
pretty thoroughly.
Yes. Uh-huh. And Sam asks, is Yata Bhuta a word in the sutta? What's the Buddhist wisdom behind these words of seeing things the way they are?
Well, you got the spelling a little bit wrong. So it's Yata Bhutang Jnana Dasanang. So Yata Bhutang is one word. It's actually a compound of two words. Yata means as it is, and Bhuta means become or true. So Yata Bhutang means accurately, or as things have come into being, as things are. And Jnana means knowing, and Dasana means seeing. So Yata Bhutang Jnana Dasanang means knowing and seeing things accurately, knowing and seeing reality as it actually is. So this is a description of wisdom. It's one of the ways the Buddha talks about the wisdom that comes through Buddhist practice, is we learn how to know and see reality as it actually is, rather than through the distorted misperceptions that we normally have. Instead, we see reality on its own terms. So this is an extremely important concept. It's the concept of putting down our assumptions and distortions and misperceptions and misunderstandings, and coming to grips with reality on its own terms. So this is a very important aspect of Buddhist practice.
Thank you, Bhante. And Michael is asking if the different color of the robes have any meaning. It's actually quite cute that we have all these different robes. I'm looking at the screen.
Yeah.
I hadn't noticed. Venerable Vimalanyani?
So they don't have any particular meaning. Of course, we are all wearing Theravada robes. The different colors come from different traditions. So usually, because Theravada Buddhism is practiced in different countries in Asia, they would traditionally dye the robes with usually natural dyes that they would find in the forest around them, because there are different plants and different trees in the different countries. So they would have different kinds of dye, and that's why the robes would have slightly different shades. So my color is similar to a color that is used in Burma quite often. The brown shades are used in many different countries, most commonly, I think, in Thailand, but I've also seen them in Sri Lanka. So yeah, also nowadays it often shows the tradition that you belong to. So for example, in Sri Lanka, there are 3 main schools called Nikayas, and they are usually recognizable in public because they're 3 different colors. One is bright orange, another one is purple, and another one is somewhat yellowy. So you could see which tradition the monk or nun belongs to.
Great, thank you, Venerable. And hello to Tara, good to see you online. Gita asks, in the Noble Eightfold Path, what is the most challenging factor for the Venerable? So I guess you want an answer from all of us. So I'll start with a very honest answer, and it's actually right speech. Not in terms of lying, actually, that is very easy to me not to lie. But in terms of actually saying words that are worth treasuring, sometimes I just open my mouth, and it's not even like necessarily, actually, I don't particularly have a problem doing small talk and all that stuff or unnecessary speech, but making sassy comments or speaking in a particular way or the other, like sometimes not with, kind of manifesting my aversion, all of that, I will be quite frank. I've been noticing more and more. But sometimes, it's the nature of aversion. The honey tip, my mind is still focused on the honey tip. There's some pleasure in making sassy remarks or something. But then now I also see the poison root. So I always reflect afterwards. In hindsight, I'm like, oh, Mara, fooled me again. I knew it. Now I see the poison root, but the honey tip is so delicious. I think this is actually what really Ajahn Chah was talking about when he said most of the practice is becoming aware of the work that needs to be done, of your defilements, and not being able to uproot them or to do what needs to be done. So I think I'm kind of like in that stage of awareness, as opposed to at the very beginning I was just blissfully ignorant, or not blissfully ignorant. There was the delusion of being blissful in the ignorance. So yeah, I would say that is the most challenging right now, at least that I'm aware of.
Yeah, and similarly for me, it's also one of the aspects of right speech, which is speaking gently. So I try, but I still sometimes sometimes speak in ways that's not gentle. So that's one part which I've always had a lot of difficulty with, that I'm still working on.
I'm nodding, but not because he doesn't. I believe I think you're doing fine, Bhante, but it is challenging.
Yeah, so for me, I think to some extent, right speech maybe also, especially, the inner monologue that goes on in your head, not necessarily what you verbalize, but, the inner monologue can be a very spontaneous reactions to stuff. So there's like the internal eye roll when something doesn't go right. So that certainly is something that I notice. Or another factor also is right samadhi. I think right samadhi is something that takes a lot of practice. That might take many years to actually properly develop, especially if you define samadhi as the 4 jhanas. Then these are very deep states of meditation that need a lot of time, a lot of practice, and a lot of supportive conditions to actually properly develop. So that's something that I'm still developing.
All right, thank you to all the venerables. We're all 8 types, so interestingly enough, the speech seems to be the one with the most honey. And then we have one second.
Is this one?
Urhel asks, recommendations on incorporating chanting to a lay practice, please. Basic when, why, and how. Anyone wants to take this question?
Yeah, well, actually, one thing that I would recommend as a lay person, so assuming that means you're going to be chanting on your own most of the time, one thing that can be very useful is to look online and find a recording of Buddhist chanting that you really like, then get a script for that chanting and chant along with the recording. So it's much easier to chant with a group of people, and it's particularly easier to chant if it's something that you like and you have some connection with. So that's what I would recommend as a way of getting into enjoying chanting practice. Or if you've spent some time at monasteries and you already have a sense as to what monasteries commonly chant, then you could chant the same things. So chant similar things to what the monasteries you like chant every day. Another strategy is there's certain basic principles which many lay Buddhists will recite every morning, such as the 3 refuges and the 5 precepts, and the qualities of Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. This would be a very standard way. It's about 5-10 minutes of chanting, which hits a lot of really critical points. So 3 refuges, 5 precepts, and the recollection of Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Yeah, so why to do it? One thing, it's fun. For another thing, it focuses your mind on the wholesome for a period of time. And it's actually really, really remarkable how powerful chanting can be as a practice, especially done right before a period of meditation. It will make your meditation much stronger. And also, as you're going throughout your day, you'll find that chanting comes up in your mind. So instead of remembering music or remembering arguments you've been having or remembering things you've been reading in the news or in novels or whatever, instead you'll have chanting. Buddhist chanting will come up in your mind. I remember many, many years ago when I first went to stay at a Theravada monastery, I was walking past the bathroom and I just heard like one of the monks was in there cleaning the bathroom, and as he was cleaning, he was chanting, and just this voice filled with joy. He was just like, "Itipi so bhagava," like you could tell he was having so much fun, like chanting the Buddha's qualities while he was cleaning the toilets. And I've never forgotten that, because his voice was just so filled with joy to be chanting about the Buddha while he was cleaning the bathrooms. So it really does bring up if you do it correctly, it can bring up a lot of joy, a lot of faith, and it also helps to clear your mind of unwholesome thoughts and to cultivate a tendency towards the wholesome. So it's definitely worth doing. When first thing in the morning is great, though really any time during the day is okay. First thing in the morning is particularly good. So those are my thoughts off the top of my head on incorporating chanting.
Great, thank you, Bante. And Lee asks, in EBT, early Buddhist texts, not for those in America, the food stamp program, which is what I originally thought it was when I first saw that on Sutta Central. in EBT, is there anywhere that the Buddha references using visualizations, for example, lights, colors, etc., or sounds, for example, mantras, as meditation objects to achieve samadhi or nibbana? Venerable Vimalanyani?
Well, I think there are different kinds of visualizations that the Buddha talks about. For example, there are also vipassana type contemplations, such as the corpse contemplations, the charnel ground contemplations, or the contemplations of the body parts, where we do visualize corpses in various states of decay, or where we do visualize body parts. There are also places in the suttas where the Buddha talks about seeing lights and seeing forms in meditation. Usually this is something that comes up during meditation. We don't imagine that it's there. It's something that we focus on our meditation, and that arises in the mind because the mind becomes very bright and very clear in meditation. So that's definitely something that the Buddha talks about. What was the question about sound objects?
Mantras.
Mantras. I'm not sure if the EBTs mention mantras. I know that nowadays it's quite popular to recite, for example, the Buddha's name, Buddho, or things like that. I'm not quite sure if that is mentioned in the EBTs as a practice. I don't remember off the top of my head, but maybe one of the other venerables remembers.
Think of mantras, but
I don't think so. I mean, visualizing light, he mentions in a few places. The kasina meditations are visualizing colors. So those are definitely mentioned as concentration practices, in addition to what Ayavan Lignani mentioned.
Yeah.
As for mantras as meditation objects, closest I can think of is there's a few places where the Buddha recommends repeating a chant in the mind.
Yes.
But their mantras are usually quite short, whereas the chants the Buddha recommends are a little bit longer than most mantras. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa, you could also consider a mantra, but in the suttas it's normally just done 3 times rather than hundreds of times as is common in mantra meditation. So I can't think of anywhere in the Pali Suttas where it specifically mentions mantra practice as it's conceived of these days. Though I don't see mantra practice as being contradictory. It certainly is a way of gaining a certain shallow samadhi. It does not produce deep samadhi, but it does produce a shallow samadhi, which can be a starting point for deep samadhi. Before a few years ago, I went to an Amitabha retreat. So where you're chanting Amitabha's name for many hours a day. And throughout the day, we would have times when we would do silent sitting meditation instead of chanting Amitabha's name. And I found that during those sitting meditations, my samadhi was extremely strong. And I attribute that to the fact that I was spending virtually every other waking minute chanting Amitabha's name. So the mind was so pure and so focused that then when we did silent sitting meditation, it was very easy to get deep samadhi.
Great. Thank you, Bante. And thank you, Venerable. And Kumu asks, if we have to pick 2 other suttas in addition to the Metta Sutta to chant or listen to with meanings, what are your suggestions? Well, personally, I would suggest the Anattalakkhana Sutta, the Discourse on Non-Self. Absolutely, well, beautiful to chant, actually, and beautiful to contemplate. And the Gacchanagotta Sutta, actually, since we started incorporating it in our morning chanting, actually, has made really actually a difference in my practice. Bhante Sudaso is really happy because it was his decision. I'm happy too. It was a little bit clunky actually to chant at the very beginning in sound-wise, but now after a while, like it sounds quite nice. So it's beautiful to chant. But in particular, it's really beautiful to contemplate and to start the morning with that type of contemplation. So that would be my suggestion. I don't know if the other venerables want to share anything.
Do you have any suggestions?
Well, traditionally, what they do in traditional Buddhist countries is to chant the Mangala Sutta, the Ratana Sutta, and the Metta Sutta together. So these are the 3 standard chants, and that people connect with very strongly, and they give them a lot of inspiration and a lot of faith and a lot of joy. So that is very, very common for lay people to chant daily, or if they go to the monastery. Other than that, I think any sutta that inspires you, that is meaningful for you, or any sutta that contains a practice that you want to develop, or that contains a teaching that you want to learn, or that you want to understand more deeply, is helpful to chant over and over, because as Bhante mentioned, that will come up during the day. So that will be in your mind, and your mind will incline to that, and probably your mind will sort of work with that, and over time develop a deeper understanding of the practices that I mentioned there. So if you want to go deeper with any particular teaching, that is very good also to chant.
Thank you, Venerable. And Anita says, so in the dependent origination, would you say ignorance is the root cause of all origination? And is enlightenment the end of all origination?
Yeah, I mean, you can say that if you like, as long as you remember that, as it says in the Kachanagota Sutta, what arises is just dukkha arising, and what ceases is just dukkha ceasing. So dukkhameva upajamanang upajati, dukkhang nirujamanang nirujati. So when you remember that, then it's like, yeah, ignorance is the root cause of all arising, because all arising is just dukkha arising. And enlightenment is the end of all arising, because once again, it's just dukkha that's arising, and enlightenment is the end of all dukkha. So you can talk in that way. You just need to be careful that you don't fall into the wrong view of non-existence or annihilation. So many people have the wrong understanding that enlightenment means non-existence, that nibbana means non-existence, but that's not correct. The Buddha was very clear that that's a misunderstanding. So as long as you don't fall into that, then yes, you can say things like what you say there.
Thank you. And Michael says, I can relate to right and wrong speech. Yeah, I think it's one of the most difficult ones. Was it you, Bhante, who actually recently was saying how many of the Vinaya rules can be broken just by speech?
Yeah, it was something I had been taught in Vinaya class probably 10 or 12 years ago, that something like 70 or 80% of the Vinaya rules you can break just with words, which was really surprising to me at the time.
Yeah, we absolutely underestimate the power of words, and that's also why actually we practice a lot of noble silence in monasteries. When in doubt, shut it out. And Bobby asks, would working for any big corporation be considered wrong livelihood? Despite my lack of sympathy for big corporations, I will have to say no, because it really depends on what you're doing, whether it's a big corporation or a small business or just your own thing or not doing anything at all, really. Like, where's your livelihood coming from? You could be in the sustainability sort of program of a big corporation and actually doing a lot of good, or in the charitable program of a corporation and doing incredible amounts of good. So it's really, what are you doing with your time? What are the actions? Once again, of course, if you're creating craving in the world, so if you're trying to convince people to, instead of, like I used to, actually, that was my field in the fashion industry, creating lots of different ideas in people's minds of all stuff that they did not need and that they would then crave, and buy a new one every day, every week, every month, every second, whatever it is. Yes, and creating lots of conditions for craving to arise in the mind, and also the destruction of the environment at large. Well, that's whether it's an indie magazine or a big magazine, large magazine, a corporate magazine, doesn't really much change. those conditions, I would say that is unwholesome. But if it's something wholesome, actually possibly maybe working for a corporation would be even better, because you can impact more people and you can have more of a sort of larger impact. So those are my thoughts, but yeah. Okay, seem to be in agreement. Rick asks, in what ways do you alter how you teach the Dhamma when teaching different types of practitioners?
Well, I usually find it much easier to teach a group of people that I'm familiar with than strangers, because I roughly know the level of knowledge that they have. So, of course, if people are practitioners that have been practicing for a long time, that have a lot of in-depth knowledge, I can teach in a completely different way. They will understand like technical terminology, for example, and we can go into a little bit more detail. For example, if I know that they are already keeping 5 precepts and that they are very generous and that they have a strong foundation in the basic practices of Buddhism, we can talk about more higher stages of practice, because we know that the Buddhist path is a gradual path. So if I teach the end stages of the path to somebody who's just beginning, that won't be of help to them, because even if they try to put that into place, they don't have the supportive conditions to actually transform the mind in that way. And so it's very important to teach in the appropriate way for the level of knowledge and the level of practice that the person is at. And sometimes it can be helpful and inspiring to a person to teach a little bit of a higher stage so that they know what they can aspire to. But usually it's better that for the most part, the most teachings that they get are appropriate to the level where they're at. So, for example, if you haven't done any preliminary practices, if you have a very, very hard time giving, practicing like things like giving, so you're very attached to your things, then you just won't be able, like if you're not even able to let go of material possessions, how would you even be able to let go of mental defilements, of the emotions that trouble you in your mind? So, the path is gradual, because we have to develop good mental habits to overcome our bad habits. And if you haven't done the preliminary things, then there's not much point teaching the higher teachings. So it's much, much easier to teach a group where you roughly know the practitioners and you roughly know their level of commitment to the path.
Yeah, I mean, also on similar lines, it helps to know what the dominant defilements of a person are. So if I'm teaching somebody who is more of a greed type, then I'll teach them practices that are meant to counteract greed. If I know they're more of a hate type, I'll teach them practices to counteract hate, and so on. So that's definitely something I'll change, is how I emphasize different aspects of the Dhamma based upon the strengths and weaknesses of the person that I'm talking to. And also, if it's a very general audience, then I'll give a very general talk. But one thing is that very important is that I will never compromise on the basic principles of Dhamma. So some things are just inescapable parts of Buddhism. Karma and rebirth, these are inescapable. The fact that our experiences are the products of our own karma, our own choices, this is inescapable. There are certain things that you just cannot get around. And those are things that I won't dilute or change or alter. So the basic principles of Dhamma are always the same no matter who I'm talking to. But what aspects I emphasize, and as Aya was saying, the amount of depth in advanced topics that I'll go into, that depends upon the audience.
Great. Thank you, Venerables. I will also just add that recently I was, recently in monastic terms, so for the past couple of months, I was noticing, actually I was contemplating on the verses where the Buddha talks about how whenever you're giving a talk on Sila, the people who have Sila, qualities of Sila developed in their minds, will start rejoicing on those qualities, on that Dhamma talk on Sila, because they will see it reflected in their own minds, and similarly samadhi and panya. So yeah, it's been very evident, because sometimes we're so clueless and we're kind of like, well, I just want to talk about sila, or I just want to talk about, panya. And then the person who is in front of us perhaps is not actually, it's not that they're not ready, but perhaps that's not what they need, rather than what they need to hear in that moment. And so one of the qualities of a Sammasambuddha, so of the historical Buddha and the Buddhas before him and the Buddhas of the future, is that not only do they speak the Dhamma, but they also know exactly what to say at the right time, with the right person in front of them. And they will shift, actually, like the Venerables were sharing, but also like in, just that's, the reason why in the suttas we see how just with one teaching, people would get levels of awakening, if not full enlightenment, whenever the Buddha would talk, because he had that innate understanding of the person he had in front of them. So yeah, I was just reflecting on this, and it actually brought a lot of joy in my mind. Whenever I see that in play, it just strengthens my faith in the Buddha, to see how incredible of a teacher he was, and he is actually. And Michael asks, sitting cross-legged aggravates an old knee injury. Are there any other recommended sitting positions besides cross-legged? Maybe?
Oh, I mean, any. So kneeling, sitting on a chair, standing. There's lots of different options. Yeah, look online. There's no shortage of other options.
Want to add anything else?
No, I agree. Also, you can try to put a pillow under your knee or wherever the injury is. See if that helps.
Okay. And Gita says, thank you for your honest answers. I'm working with the arising of thought and trying to use mindfulness to catch my thoughts. Also working on developing a deeper samadhi. Great. We're all working on the same thing. So it's good company. And Michael asks, is it okay to chant in English? Yes, absolutely. Whatever works, whatever inspires you to practice the teachings of the Buddha, that is the appropriate way to practice.
I think it's actually important to chant in a language that you understand, or at least understand what you're chanting, even if you're chanting in Pali. That's very, very important. That also makes it much easier for your mind to work with the teachings that are in there and to understand more deeper what's going on there.
Yeah, actually at the monastery, in fact, we chant both in Pali and English precisely for that reason, since none of us was born mother tongue Pali. And Jonathan says, I was a Theravada Buddhist for 16 years until I realized what a damaging teaching it was and is. Oh, okay. Buddhism is basically a mode of suicide with a supernatural twist. I think you misunderstood the teachings of the Buddha, definitely the Theravada teachings. So if you're interested, you're welcome to ask questions rather than making statements, and we'll try our best to answer any doubt that you have based on what you just expressed. What actually made you think that this is the path? So. If you think that there is a quote, perhaps that you've seen in the suttas, you're welcome to write it down, and the Sangha is happy to highlight them. But yeah, it's definitely not a mode of suicide with a supernatural twist. Actually, quite the opposite. And Dave says, Venerables, does the Deathless describe the unconditional stillness of samadhi, something else, or many things? Looks like it, yeah. Great question for Bhante Sudaso, who's already jumping on it.
So the Deathless refers to Nibbana. So it refers to absolute reality beyond. Can you scroll up so I can see the question again? Thank you. It refers to the absolute reality beyond the concepts of existence and non-existence. So it is in fact unconditioned. So the nature of nibbana, the nibbana dhatu, is that it neither arises nor ceases. It cannot be defined either as existing or as not existing. And it cannot be defined in terms of conditions or characteristics, except that it does have these characteristics, once again, of not arising and not ceasing, not coming and not going, and so on. It can be described as stillness, as long as you recognize that within that stillness, there is all motion. So it doesn't exclude motion. So it's not samadhi. So samadhi is a conditional stillness. Samadhi is a particular condition of mind in which many of our ordinary mental activities temporarily stop. But it's not a deathless state. So samadhi is a conditional state within the realm of birth and death. So I think that answers that question. Ivan Lanyani, do you have anything else to add on the subject?
No, I also agree. Samadhi is still a state that will lead you to a rebirth in a Deva realm or in a Brahma realm, so a higher realm. But that is not the ending of rebirth. So that's not the same as Nibbana.
All right, it looks like we have a lot of questions. Jonathan, you're making a lot of statements, once again, as mentioned earlier. So if you have a question, you're welcome to put it in. But
I will just say, briefly looking, again, Jonathan, the comments you're making are based upon misunderstandings and misrepresentations of the Buddha's teachings. So I really would encourage you to ask questions about the ideas that you have, and we'll answer questions. But the statements you're making, they're just not accurate. So I don't really see much point in addressing them.
Yeah. And Philippe asks, all sankharas are impermanent, all dhammas are non-self. Does it imply that sankharas are a type of dhamma and some dhammas are not impermanent? Vimalanyani, would you like to answer that?
Does it imply that all sankharas are dhammas and that some dhammas are not impermanent, so that some dhammas are permanent? So dhammas here refers to mind states or phenomena, things that arise in the mind, mind objects sometimes also translated. So yes, sankharas are also things that arise in the mind. In that sense, you could say all sankharas are mental objects, but there are no dhammas that are permanent. So the fundamental teachings of the Buddha is that everything in samsara has three characteristics, which is anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. So dhammas, mental objects, also are things that arise in samsara. So definitely they also fall under the three characteristics, and they're also all impermanent. Mm. Maybe one of the other venerables has something to add?
Yeah, I mean, one common way this is explained is to say that all dhammas are non-self, includes also nibbana. So this is sometimes said that nibbana can be called a dhamma, but it cannot be called a sankhara. And nibbana also cannot be defined as impermanent, because there's nothing in nibbana that arises and ceases. Therefore, it cannot be spoken of as being either permanent or impermanent. So that's one explanation I've heard about this. But also Ivan Lanyani's explanation just now is perfectly valid. Yeah, I wouldn't make too big a deal about it. Again, all things are both impermanent and impersonal. So yeah, I wouldn't make too big a deal on the language there. I don't think it's very significant.
Great, thank you to both venerables. And Scott says, last night I was awakened by fear of karma because of the unskillful things I have done in the past and may do so in the future. Can the Bhantes relate? Personally, not really, as in in the way that I was never awakened by fear, but definitely the sort of, I mean, I tend to sleep really well. That's what I guess I'm trying to say. But yes, of course, unskillful things that I've done in the past sometimes appear in the mind. That's why it's extremely important to purify your sila. So remorse is one of the hindrances, restlessness and remorse. So restlessness can come from a lot of different reasons, but definitely remorse, what we've done in the past, is definitely a big deal, a huge part of it. So what has been done in the past has been done in the past. So what we should focus on is, what are we doing right now that we can control? And the more you start purifying your sila, your morality, the more you become a better person, the more actually your mind becomes a really pleasant place where to be. The more you have things that you can recollect, all here today we can recollect, oh, we haven't killed any sentient being. It's pretty great. We haven't stolen anything. Yeah, we haven't taken anything that has not been given to us. We haven't done any sexual misconduct. Actually, we haven't done any sexual anything. That's great. Cut it at the root. Yeah, we haven't lied. Yeah, that's just all wonderful things. Right? No intoxicants. Pretty decent people. Yeah. Hey, you guys are great.
You too.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm great too. That's wonderful. And this is not being arrogant. This is actually recollecting our own goodness. And just by saying it, by reflecting on it, one feels much better. So then one has a good sleep, good night's sleep. Yeah, and if, unskillful things that we've done in the past occur in the mind, we also have context for it. We can go, okay, yes, of course, I'm delusional and, full of greed, hatred, and delusion. And back then, I really didn't know better, but now I do, so I can commit myself to do better. So don't worry about it. Don't worry about the past. Don't worry about the future. Just put the right effort to purify your mind right now. And Anita asks, can you speak a few words in the practice of noble silence? Venerable Vimalanyani?
Yeah, it's a great practice. Do it as much as you can. The less you indulge in chatter, the more calm your mind will become. Especially if you don't talk on the Dhamma, but talk on random other stuff. So if you do that, your mind will become much calmer. If your mind is much calmer, your mindfulness will be much easier to maintain. So it's much easier to spot the defilements in your mind and to remove them if your mind is generally calm and generally more pure. And it's also much easier to develop deeper stages of meditation and samadhi. So it's extremely helpful on the path. And I think, yeah, everybody should practice it as much as they can. And it's very, very pleasant. So don't be afraid of, being in silence.
And thank you, Aya. And Dharma Learner asks, what can I use as a technique to overcome very old memories involving anger for misdeeds I still hold against me?
I'm not sure if you mean things you've done or things that other people have done to hurt you. So either way, it's actually similar. So first off, recognize you cannot change the past. So it's very important to remember. There's nothing you can do to change the past. All you can do is make commitments in the present moment to not create the causes of suffering. So actually a very powerful recollection is to recollect, first off, I cannot change the past. And second, to remember your own goodness. As Ayasoma was saying a moment ago, to recollect your own commitment to morality, your own commitment to wisdom, your own commitment to purifying your own mind. That will make you happy in the present moment, but also it will remind you that this means that both you won't do any misdeeds in the future, but also that because you're generating good karma, then you also will not be targeted by misdeeds from others. So either way, as long as you have this commitment to morality and kindness, then you have nothing to worry about, either from others or from yourself. And sometimes a practice I use, which is really helpful, is when when old memories are arising, especially memories of my own misconduct or my own mistakes, is I'll just remind myself, death, death, death. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. Death will come. Death will come. And that kind of puts things in perspective. It's like, I'm going to die, and I might die very soon. So why am I wasting my precious life rolling around in these old useless memories? What a huge waste of time. So for me, recollection of death really puts old memories in the proper context, so that I appreciate the preciousness of the present moment, rather than rolling around in these old dead thoughts.
Great, thank you, Bante. And Anita asks, do you have the English chants in script form that can be shared? Yes, actually, they're on our website, the BuddhistInsights.org website. If I remember correctly, on the top left of the screen, there's a link that says resources or something like that, or links, something like that. And there's the chants that we do actually here at Empty Cloud Monastery, as well as different links to different websites like Sutta Central from our friends Bante Sujato and team, as well as other different places where you can find English chants. Actually, I think also there's lots of there's chanting books from Abhayagiri Monastery. I think there's a link there as well. Anyway, if you want something in particular, you can send us an email, and someone will get back to you with the links. And Michael says, sounds like I should find some Dhamma talks about aversion. What would be a good way to find Dhamma talks about aversion? Find suttas that focus on aversion. Well, yes, also on this channel, we have given, definitely the two of us have given plenty of talks on aversion. Maybe we'll ask Venerable Vimal and Yanni to give one too, so we can have all the hate types talking about how to deal with their frenemy. Yeah, actually, if I remember correctly, I had given a talk with several different suttas. So there were lots of different quotes there. Yeah, but there's an abundance, because once again, everybody is suffering from greed, hatred, and delusion. Every monastic that gets into the robes will give a talk on that sooner rather than later. And Certified Hustler says, where are you located? We're located in West Orange, New Jersey.
It's just outside New York City.
Yeah, right outside New York City, exactly. And when did monks start using technology?
Oh, I want to answer this one.
Sure.
Since the very beginning. So what is technology? Fire is a technology. Clothing is a technology. Speech is a technology. So monks have been using technology since the very beginning. So the question is always, how can we use the technologies that we have access to? How can we use them in a wholesome way that supports the path to awakening for ourselves and others? That's always the question. So monks have always used technology. They've always used the technologies that were available to them. And our practice has always been to try to use them in a way that supports our practice and the practice of others as well, just as we're doing here tonight.
And Sheridan asks, I have noticed that my meditation has become more stable and peaceful, but then the mind can be wildly unruly, maybe more than before. Is there a reason for these seeming extremes arising? Venerable Vimalanyani?
So there are different possibilities. One is that because your mind is more stable and peaceful, you actually see more clearly what's going on. So the craziness has always been there, but you weren't able to properly recognize that because your mind was so agitated that your mindfulness was weak. And now that you've become more calm, you can actually see more clearly what's going on. That's very often the case also for people who start meditation new. They think, oh, before I was okay, but now that I meditate, suddenly my mind goes crazy. And actually the mind has always been crazy, but now they see what's going on. Another possibility is that when you go deeper in your meditation, a deeper layer of defilement is accessible to you for you to see. So when it's quite common after a very peaceful meditation that the next time your mind gets very, very agitated because a deeper level of defilement has been stirred up and became more prominent. That wasn't accessible to you before, that you weren't able to see before. So that's another possibility. So just keep on practicing. As you have overcome defilements before, in order to get peaceful, you'll also be able to overcome this new defilement and just, go deeper and deeper into the peace. But the path takes time. It's not a quick path. So you have to have patience and just keep on practicing.
Great, thank you, Venerable. And Certified Hustler asks, are you real monks? Well, I guess as real as anything can be. Rick says, Venerables, how do we learn to value simplicity and peace and to let go of the compulsive need to always be productive?
Pay attention to the happiness of not needing anything. Pay attention to the happiness of contentment, the happiness of stillness, the happiness of not needing anything. So cultivate an appreciation for a peaceful mind. So you learn to value simplicity and peace by paying attention to the happiness of simplicity and peace. And you let go of the compulsive need to be productive by paying attention to the discomfort of that compulsion. Oh, and practice a lot of samadhi, that helps too.
Yeah. I've also add what has really helped actually in my practice is also, well, exactly what Bhante has mentioned, but also contemplating, how we've been doing the same thing over and over again. And every time it looks like it's something special. And we can see it within this lifetime. We don't even have to go too much in the larger scope of things. It's kind of like more that we deduct that, like it's kind of obviously since this lifetime we've done all of that, then we can see how we've been most likely been doing this without discoverable beginning. But yeah, like every time that we start anything, really, that we do anything, it always looks like the most special and gratifying thing. And when you go on retreat in particular, or in a monastery if you're a lay person, and all of a sudden, you don't have your electronics to distract you, you don't have, you can't eat at whatever time, and so take refuge in the fridge is not available to you, take refuge in TV or the computer is not available to you, and the phone, you don't have your friends to do small talk, and the monastics are also boring and they don't really talk that much, and if they talk, they only talk about Dhamma, and you can't really talk about whatever TV show that you've been watching because, well, they haven't watched TV in quite some time. So even if they wanted to, they have no terms of reference. And all of a sudden, all the things that you don't even pay attention in your day-to-day life, or perhaps that you hate, like washing the dishes, become entertaining, become like new, become like, wow, the most exciting thing ever. So you can actually really see this compulsion happening. It was very evident when we used to do retreats in Rockaway Beach. Some retreats we would have complete noble silence so that people would relinquish all the electronics and obviously not speak with one another. And some others actually we would, we wouldn't allow them to read. And some others we would allow them to read. Now, when we would allow them to read, people were constantly reading. Like whenever there was a break, they would devour like the entire Pali Canon, or like anything. But if when we stopped, like if the retreat was entirely, practicing noble science, so no reading included, the monastery would be polished, sparkling clean. It was incredible. And so we see that, a lot of the times we just want to fill in the gaps, we fill in the dots. One of the most difficult meditation practices is Shikantaza, silent illumination, which is also called just sitting. And how many times we say, oh, I just wish I could sit. But in reality, what we mean is, I just wish I could lay down and like think about blah, 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 or type in this or watch this or do something. You're still doing something, but actually not doing anything is insane. And also as monastics, you know, when we started this winter retreat, this at the very beginning of this year, we went on retreat for 2 months. And the first week, as soon as we stopped everything, I had been looking forward to the retreat for months because we can get a little bit busy here as well. And we start, and I'm like, oh, for the first time, I have all this plenty, you know, all the time for myself. I can decide whatever I want to do. Well, I started basically, I was starting to design the entire landscape of the monastery. I'm not even into plants. And I had to catch myself and go like, really, the mind is so bizarre. It would rather, you know, take on any type of project rather than do the most difficult of projects. So we can do anything. Anything is that we think is ambitious, nothing. It pales in comparison to eliminating greed, hatred, and delusion in the mind. That is the hard work. We once went to a corporation in Manhattan, and we were giving teachings, and one of them was like, oh, but you know, I wish I could be like you monks, but you know, I'm very ambitious. And I was like, you're not very ambitious. This is the most ambitious thing I've ever done in my life. And that's why I haven't accomplished it yet. I've accomplished pretty much anything that I put myself to in my mind as a layperson. This is the most ambitious thing, is to uproot the defilements. So yeah, so once you reflect in this way and you're honest with yourself, so a lot of times we lie to ourselves, but let's be honest. Let's go, yeah, I'm an addict. I can't stop myself. Then you start laughing too. You're like, okay, there you go. Silly Soma is trying to plan the landscape, and she doesn't even like landscaping. Or silly Soma wants to do this or that, or yeah, just laugh about it. And you have then this passion towards all these things. You can let them go, you can pass them.
Also, just to mention, tomorrow evening, I will be giving a talk on the joy of renunciation.
Great.
So you might want to tune in for that.
Yeah, also known as JOMO, the joy of missing out, instead of FOMO, the fear of missing out. And Wang Tokong asks, what is being grasped, I guess, attached after craving in dependent origination? One of the two.
It's whatever you are craving. So you have desire for something, and then attachment is, so desire is wanting something, and attachment is not wanting to let go of something. So for example, you see something and you want it. That's desire arising, that's tanha. And then once you get it, you don't want it to end. You don't want it to stop. That's upadana, that's grasping. That's one way of explaining it anyway. But usually it's the same object. So tanha and upadana, they have the same object. It just has to do with the intensity and nature of one's relationship to it. So tanha is just that initial arising of wanting, and then upadana is grasping, like not wanting to let go of it.
Great, thank you. And Pial asks, right concentration, the 8th factor in the path, is basically the higher mental absorptions or jhanas, and is not the end goal of the Buddhist path. Sutta texts also discuss the 9th and 10th factor, right knowledge and right release, indicating a total of 10 factors for one who has accomplished the path. They are mentioned but not explicitly discussed in Sutta texts. Is there a reason for it?
Yeah, according to my understanding, right knowledge and right release is what happens right knowledge is what happens when you become fully enlightened. And right release is that you are then released from all your defilements, you become an arahant. So this is not something we practice. The first 8 factors is what we practice, and the last 2 is the result that happens, but as a result of the practice. So you put the conditions into place, and these 2 are the results. So because the Buddha teaches a practical path, he teaches us what we need to do, what we need to practice. So, and the other two things come automatically. That's why there's not that much teachings on them.
All right, sounds great. Thank you, Venerable. And oh, Ananda, good to see you online. And Sam says, can the other two, Aya and Bante, also offer thoughts on wisdom behind seeing things the way they are? I don't remember anymore the question.
I already, Yathabhutang Jnana-dasanam, so the context and relevance of knowing and seeing things as they really are. I gave an answer, but I think he's asking for the two of you to answer it as well.
Okay. Yeah, it's fundamentally important. This is why we practice the entire Buddhist path, and especially meditation, to make our minds so clear and pure that we can actually see things as they really are. So right now, all the defilements are there like clouds, and they cloud our vision, so we cannot properly see what's going on. For example, it's like trying to see underwater. Everything will be very distorted. And that's what the defilements are doing in our mind. We can't properly see what's going on in reality. And there are certain, especially we can't see the three characteristics properly. So impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and impersonality or non-self. So there are always things, so intellectually, usually people can understand about impermanence, but usually people have quite a lot of trouble to understand that everything is unsatisfactory. Usually they will say, well, but this and that thing is very pleasant. So even understanding dukkha properly isn't something that is accessible to many people. And then understanding non-self or impersonality is even much more difficult than that. So yeah, the whole path, the whole practice is about being able to see reality as it really is.
Yeah, thank you, Venerable. What I will share, perhaps, I mean, actually seeing things the way they are is what really interested me in pursuing Buddhism. So actually, fundamentally, that was the quest that I always had since I have memory of it. Actually, as an adolescent, there was this realization also because when I was a child, my parents moved a lot, and I always had to change sort of environment and group of friends. And once when I was a young child, also country. So there was this sort of realization that whenever you are surrounded by people who are doing the same thing or believing the same thing or eating the same thing, there is some sort of uniformity that kind of creates this sense of reality, the sense of consistency. But as soon as if you change environments over and over again, then you don't have that sense of belonging to one place and that sense of like monoculture or mono habits or mono ideology. So very early on, there was this idea in my mind of, well, clearly things aren't exactly the way that people, believe them to be, including myself, and also seeing the changes of the changing of my thoughts, of my likes, of my experience of the world. So there were a lot of questions, I guess, and very few answers. So that also brought me as a layperson to pursue journalism, actually, for particularly that purpose, to kind of just constantly meet people and ask them questions and also travel in lots of different places and trying to figure things out. What is the human condition? What is this all about? What is the point of all of this? What is the reality of things? What are my delusions? But I guess there was also a lot of depression in my mind because you have all these questions and there are very few answers there, if any at all, that you can find, until I found Buddhism. And then all of a sudden first of all, there is no question that you can't ask. And there's always an answer that makes sense within the path. So it's incredibly, actually delicious, intellectually, to start, and then even more so when you start experiencing it for yourself. So it's not just something that you talk about with your friends to impress them, but rather it's something that you can experience. And you don't have to wait until full enlightenment. You can experience it as you go. So you start seeing actually things the way they are as you go, clearer and clearer. So once again, like when you're cleaning a window, it's not that before it's dirty and then all of a sudden it becomes instantly like shiny and clear. There's like a process. So as you start seeing a little bit, as you start polishing, you start seeing a little bit more and more with the mind, kind of like what we were talking about actually, right speech. At the very beginning, you're completely unaware of how you're going about in the world, and then you start seeing more and more, and actually there is some release from suffering because you start catching yourself here and there. You practice letting go here and there. You're like, oh, I want to make this sassy comment. Well, actually I'll let go, that's not really appropriate. Or this whatever statement here, nah, not a good idea. Then you fall into not a trap, and you're like, okay, this time I wasn't that skillful, but you become more and more aware, and you start seeing things as it goes. So I hope that helped. And hello, Bantya Kaliko, good to see you, Venerable, from sunny Sydney. Well, hello from sunny New Jersey. Now it's actually more moony. Moonlit. And yes, our community, well, we're well and happy. And Dharma Learner says, I find my mind is agitated during the day after having sat for meditation the night prior. I use continuing the breath as my method. Should I be concerned I am doing it incorrectly?
Well, I mean, if a meditation technique is making you more agitated, then yeah, you might want to try something different. Breath meditation does make some people agitated. So if that's your experience, then you might try something else. So trying loving kindness meditation or mindfulness of the body or something other than breath meditation. Try something else. You're not obligated to use any particular technique, and if something is not getting good results, or if it's even counterproductive, then do something different.
Right. And Philippe asks, what are the basics of insight meditation? Venerable Vimalanyani?
Well, we are trying to understand reality as it really is. So we are trying to understand the three characteristics: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and impersonality. So there are plenty of different techniques that we can use. Body contemplations, for example, is a very popular technique, or different other kinds of contemplations. If you're interested, you could have a look, for example, at the Satipatthana Sutta. There are many methods there for the various kinds of body meditations that are possible to do. Also, there are famous Vipassana teachers, especially in Burma. You could look at the Cuenca method is quite famous. I think Mahasi Sayadaw's method is also quite famous. So just, try out different things, see what fits for you. If you have questions about any particular technique, I think you could also post a question and we will try to answer it.
Yeah, and I'd say in the simplest terms, insight meditation is any practice which helps you to directly see impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self. So there's many ways of doing that, but that's the basic idea of it.
Thank you. And Bobby says, do you all think that Nagarjuna reflects the Buddha's teachings accurately? I'm not an expert, so I'll pass. Anyone?
So the most important of Nagarjuna's teachings is called the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, the root discourse on the middle way, which is basically an extended explanation of the Kachanagota Sutta. And I haven't read it in a few years now, but I remember it being actually a very lovely detailed and logical explanation of emptiness, again, based upon the Kachanagota Sutta. I didn't have any problems with it. I thought it was actually quite accurate, quite correct. There's a number of other books attributed to Nagarjuna which I'm less familiar with, and so I can't speak about them in such detail. But the Mula Madhyamaka Karika it's a real classic of Mahayana philosophy in particular, and it's yeah, I liked it. I enjoyed it. I thought it was quite good. Didn't see anything in there that struck me as wrong Dhamma. It all seemed to be quite in line with the Buddha's teachings. Yeah. As for his other books, I'm less familiar with his other books.
All right. And Felipe asks how to properly respect the Uposatha when work drains a lot of energy. Well, like the Buddha recommends to practice the Uposatha. So taking the 8 precepts, so a few more than hopefully the ones that you already take every day, which is the 5 precepts. And yeah, recollecting actually how with this practice, that for a day you're practicing like an arhat, like an enlightened being. Only that just fills your mind full of joy. Wonderful, wonderful recollection. So you see that actually the Uposatha, it's not this like other day that is draining you even more so because you're also not having dinner. At least the other days you still have to go to work, but you also can have dinner. Rather becomes actually something that gives you more energy, more spiritual energy, more happiness, more kindness, more compassion. And ideally, if you have the time and you're not too constrained with work duties, job duties. I don't know where you are around the world, but you know, Buddhist countries usually the Uposatha is a national holiday. So then people have the time to go to the temple. Sometimes in other countries, well, most of the time actually in other countries that is not the case. But the good thing is that we're following the lunar calendar, which means that actually the Uposatha changes, the day changes dramatically from month to month. So there's lots of times that actually will happen on the day where you have the day off. So take the opportunity, make the commitment to go to the temple, make the commitment to practice perhaps more intensively, more meditation. Then you see that it's actually something that you're looking forward to rather than something that is a burden. So this is what comes to mind, but maybe the Venerable have other suggestions.
Yeah, do things that are inspiring to you. So if work drains you, then don't do things that drain you on Uposatha. Try to have a joyful mind and do practices that give you energy, that give you inspiration. And something, you know, don't make Uposatha into another dreadful thing that you also have to complete and you have to keep these annoying 8 precepts and it's all very terrible. But, you know, make this into a day where you like recharge your energy, where you get a lot of joy, where you get a lot of inspiration. And yeah, try to see that these precepts are actually helping you in your practice and that they are very joyful things to keep. And again, tomorrow I'm talking about the joy of renunciation and we'll talk about the 8 precepts. So if you're interested, you can tune in tomorrow also.
Great. And Rick says, I have become aware that the compulsion to be productive is driven by the fear of being harmed by abusive people in my life. My mind has sought safety from abuse by being constantly busy. Well, first of all, I'm very sorry that you've been through so much suffering. It is very unfortunate. And yeah, it's good though that you have seen this pattern, that you are aware of how it manifests. And in this way, you can retrain your mind to do something else. So this is what we do. First, we acknowledge the suffering. First, it's the First Noble Truth. Then we see the cause of suffering. Then we remind ourselves that there is an end to this suffering. We don't have to repeat the same thing that, you know, causes more and more suffering, or that keeps on, you know, tangled up in the same mess. And there is a way out of suffering, the Noble Eightfold Path. So we, step by step, gently, you don't have to, you know, be too harsh with yourself or like shift everything rapidly. We kind of like have these, either 0, 100%. I am definitely one of them. And it's not terribly healthy sometimes, we want to give ourselves some time to adjust and make a positive association with the practice, not something, another way through which we torture ourselves, as we were saying. And Spike Girls, fun nickname, says, do you feel that balancing masculine and feminine energy is important to the path?
Well, first off, I'd really ask you to think deeply about these words, masculine and feminine, and ask yourself what you think they mean. Because for the most part, the concepts of masculine and feminine are cultural constructs which don't have any absolute reality, and vary dramatically from culture to culture, from time and place. And so what does it mean to be masculine? What does it mean to be feminine? There is no permanent, real definition to these things. So what I actually recommend is, instead of thinking about balancing masculine and feminine, I recommend that you just drop the whole concept of masculine and feminine completely. And instead ask yourself, how can I be kind? How can I be generous? How can I stabilize my mind? Those are the right questions to ask. You don't need to worry about whether you come across as masculine or feminine, because that's totally beside the point. It doesn't have anything to do with spiritual practice. Those are my thoughts anyway.
Well, similarly, I've been studying and pondering these sort of concepts, because actually they weren't really part of the conversations or the way of seeing the world that I had as a layperson. Ironically, for me, it's been the other way around with Buddhist practice. So yeah, I still actually do not have a definition of masculine and feminine energy. I mean, there are certain stereotypes that have been presented to me, but I have a female body, so in theory I have a supposedly feminine energy, but not really. So so I don't know. It's still actually a very interesting topic of contemplation also in meditation practice. What is this masculine and feminine energy? Interesting question. But Venerable Yanni might have a different.
No, I agree.
Great. All on the same page. And Michael asks, what's a good practice or thing to do when you are laying in bed trying to go to sleep? Meditation. Yeah, if you suffer from insomnia, that's kind of like great. If you're a Buddhist practitioner, that's when you can meditate. And then if you get the hindrance of drowsiness, then also great, because then you can sleep. Win-win. But if you don't get it, then it's great, because you're free from the hindrance of drowsiness, sloth, and torpor. It's wonderful. When in doubt, to just meditate. And Dharma Learner says, I've heard mentioned just sitting just now in this discussion, one a few weeks ago. I'm not familiar with this method. Can a brief description be contrasted with counting the breath, concentration? Well, since I spoke about it before, maybe Bhante Sudaso.
Yeah, so well, first off, I prefer the title Silent Illumination for this practice. That's the name for it that I prefer. Second, this is a very advanced technique. It's a combined samadhi and vipassana practice, so a combined concentration and wisdom practice that is quite advanced. It's quite difficult. In the Pali tradition, it's commonly called objectless concentration or undirected concentration. So it's a practice where you have no object that you're focusing on. Instead, the Buddha describes it as constantly letting go of all objects. That's how it's described in the Pali Canon, and also in the Mahayana texts that describe this meditation. Constantly letting go of all objects. So by contrast, any kind of breath meditation involves focusing on your breath. So your breath is the object that you're focusing on. In silent illumination practice or objectless meditation, you're practicing letting go of all objects, which would include your breath as well as everything else. Again, it's a very difficult practice because commonly when people let go of all objects, they just fall asleep. So that's why you have to make sure that you're keeping your mind very sharp and alert. Otherwise, you're not doing this practice correctly. If you want to learn more about this practice, I highly recommend reading the teachings of Chan Master Sheng Yen. So Shengyen, Sheng Yen. So Chinese monk who gives very clear explanations on how to do this kind of meditation, silent illumination practice.
Great, thank you, Bhante. And Gita sends her thank yous to Ayami Mariani for the series on the days of old, which you all should watch on our channel. She's done an incredible amount of scholarly work. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And so, yeah, you can search her name and find lots of really good material. And actually, Venerable will also be offering other talks on the subject matter. So stay tuned. And Bobby asks, how should I deal with my craving for Nibbana? Practice the path, and then you'll deal at the end with the craving for Nibbana. I think it's actually healthy for the time being. It's kind of like craving for, vegetables or for spinach. It's okay. First to deal with the craving for junk food. Eliminate that, and then you deal with the craving for veggies. And Alexis says, Venerables, how to deal with resistance to meditation? I have stopped enjoying meditation, and recently I feel the meditation as suffering. Venerable Vimalanyani.
Okay, well, that seems like you're making some insights, and you see that everything in the world is suffering, including meditation. So rejoice in your insight. If you rejoice, then hopefully joy will come up again. But more seriously, if you can use this as a meditation object, then very good. Otherwise, try a different technique. So if your meditation makes you suffer, then there's so many techniques out there, and try a few different ones and see if one helps you. For example, try metta practice. That could bring up a lot of joy. Or just anything that you feel drawn to.
Great. And we have 3 questions left. I think we can do them in 2 minutes.
Okay.
Anne asks, how to overcome the tendency of negative intrusive thoughts? Sutasa.
Read the Vitakka Santana Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 20. It gives you 5 very powerful techniques for this.
Perfect. Wonderful. And Fernando asks, oh, Harmito, good to see you online. Wonderful. Harmito is just a resident here. Fernando says, can one become a monk while also taking care of their role of being a biological parent? Yes, whether they're female or male monastic, they can take care of a certain point. We were actually talking about that earlier. There were several different...
of being a parent.
Oh, being a biological parent. I need to say English as a second language. So I think I created a story in my mind. While also taking care of their role of being a biological parent. Oh, well, yes and no, in the sense of it really depends on what you mean about being a biological parent. First of all, you shouldn't have children while you are monastic, but you can ordain as a monastic if you have had children already. So we have actually several monastic friends that have children, and they're still their parents, but obviously in a different capacity that they were if they were householders. And the Buddha was actually a monastic parent himself. And in fact, Rahula is, I think he was said to be 7 years old when he, or 8 years old, something like that, when he actually ordained and started practicing taught by the Buddha, and shortly thereafter attained the awakening. So our duty then as monastics, if we're parents, should be to teach the Dhamma to our children. So follow the footsteps of the Buddha.
Yeah, it is usually recommended to wait until your children are grown up before you become a monk.
Yeah.
The Buddha was an exception. for the rest of us, it's usually better to wait until they're grown up.
And this, for Bhante Sudaso, it is said that name and form as a requisite condition comes consciousness. From consciousness as a requisite condition comes name and form. From name and form, is the consciousness mentioned here specific for rebirth linking consciousness, or does it happen right here, right now, as we discuss this question?
I would say right here, right now. By the way, the sutta that you referenced there, that's a very profound teaching, which I could talk about that for hours. Just the quote you gave, I could talk about it for hours. But yeah, briefly speaking, it's referring to immediate present moment consciousness. It's not as I understand, it's not talking about rebirth linking consciousness. But there's a way that you could understand it in that way, but that's not the way I understand it.
And I'm typing Master Cheng Yan, founder of Dharma Drum, for Science and Illumination. And the people are, how can you spell the Vitaka Sutta?
So it's Majjhima Nikaya number 20. Sorry, this one. Majjhima Nikaya 20, Vitaka Santana Sutta. That's a discourse on dealing with distracting thoughts.
Great, and that's all for this evening. 2 minutes late, but not too bad, Bhante. And Harmeet, good to see that you have arrived home safely. Wonderful. All right, so we can end this evening with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
And if you're around in New Jersey this weekend, tomorrow afternoon, there will be meditation and hiking and meditation walk led at the reservation close by Bhante Sumita. And then at 6 p.m. At the monastery, you can meet Venerable Vimalanyani, who will be sharing some words of Dhamma. And then on Sunday, you can come and bring your entire family to our family day here at the monastery at Empty Cloud. And then, of course, the live streams will resume next week, as usual, same time, same place. So lots of good things. Also featuring very soon Ajahn Punadhammo as a teacher. He will be sharing some teachings on dependent origination, since it's our special month on that topic. So stay tuned for lots of good Dhamma from many monastics. All right, may you be all well and happy, and may all good things come to you.